Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. Beverly and I are from Cleveland, outside of Cleveland, right, Northeast Ohio. We're here to talk about meeting the patient where they're at, and we're going to talk about our best practices with regards to mobile imaging fleet. So thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. So Krissie's team runs the operations of the mobiles that we have at university hospitals, and my team, I'm the director for Informatics, and my team works very closely with her team and with IT on connections. We do report up through radiology, so we're heavily involved. So our learning objectives for today is that when you leave today, you will be able to describe how having dedicated leadership and oversight provides consistent and efficient operations to accomplish systemness and standardization. Also, you will be able to describe how the mobile fleet provides flexibility to meet the needs of the patient. Hence, our title is Meeting the Patient Where They're At. And that also, you know, patients, we have rural community hospitals that in our system, and this way the patients don't have to drive into downtown, you know, Cleveland, and they can get the care where they need closer to home. Also, being able to understand the benefits of the footprint that you have today with your stationary equipment, and then with the benefits of having the mobile equipment, and again, serving your communities. So as in healthcare, we have HTM in the room and operations? You guys from which side of from radiology operations or HTM, biomed?
Yeah.
Compliance, okay.
We love compliance.
How about you guys?
Field service.
Field service, okay. Field, biomed, okay.
And we know you guys.
We know.
We're not asking you.
So it's nice to know, you know, because there's different perspectives of where this, you know, how we're using the mobiles and how it applies to you. So patient is at the forefront for all of us, regardless of what role we have in healthcare, and driving all of our business decisions. Enables the ability to leverage our costly resources. So for example, an MR is not a cheap piece of equipment. None of our equipment is cheap. And this, having mobile, allows us to leverage those resources where we need them the most for the patients, for our business. Also allows support standardization and systemness, because with our mobile fleets, as you'll find, we've over the years, so we had our first mobile in 2009. And Krissie will get into the fleet size we have today, but essentially being able to be standardized and repeating is very important. And looking at the data, using the data, and we find this in anything we do today, right? What is the data that drives our decision? You know, where do we have a need more access? Maybe where are we not leveraging the resources? So those are things that we'll go through today too. And then the benefit of expanding your footprint, whether it be stationary or mobile.
So I'm going to review the current state with you, our current state with our organization. So currently, our organization across the entire system, we perform about 1.6 million radiology procedures a year. So that's just to let you know how our organization is structured and how big we are. We currently service multiple mobiles. We have 13 medical centers we support and 40 plus health centers that we support across the organization. We currently have 4 mobile MRI units. We also have 2 mobile MRI stationary units as well that sit on site at 1 ambulatory location as well as 1 medical center. We have 2 PET CT units. We have 1 wellness, which is a mammography mobile. And then we recently just had a CT join our fleet last fall. So the other thing I just want to mention too is, for as big as our organization is, we do have 1 EMR, we have Epic, we have 1 PACS, and then Epic does include our radiology information system as well. So that's important to know that that's all supported with 1 electronic medical record and then 1 PACS system as well. So. And then what we're going to do is we're going to review some consistent, efficient operations, we're going to go through some of the vendor selections, specific configurations of trailers that you have to keep in mind when purchasing or whether you go to lease, talk about site requirements preparation, as well as equipment repair, preventative maintenance schedules. We're going to talk through mobile leadership structure that we have at our organization, the staffing, and then the financials. So when we get into vendor selection, one of the important things is to have a vendor partnership, right? So we have multiple vendor partnerships depending on what the modality is that we're trying to support in a mobile. You always want to take into account the functionality of each of the mobiles. Of course, the cost, leasing or buying, right? We have a little bit of a mixed in our organization. We purchase some, and then we also have some leases as well. Obviously, with a lease, your lease is your short-term solution, where a buy would be that long-term solution. Also, leases help to support staffing as needed. When you lease a mobile unit, the leasing mobile company allows us to use some of their staff that they hire on if we don't have enough staff to support at that entity that we are taking the mobile to. And then, of course, when you're purchasing an actual mobile, we plan to staff it ourselves, of course. And then what we do is before we ever buy a mobile unit and decide to put it into our fleet, one of the important things we talk about is with our modality triads. We have triads for each of our modalities across the system. That triad consists of a radiology manager, a director, a couple supervisors, and then we also have radiologists part of that team to make sure that we're selecting the proper equipment for that specific modality and making sure we're making the right decisions for software and what we want to provide to our community for consistency and standardization. And one thing I just want to mention too is when we talk about the functionality, when you talk about functionality on the previous slide, I want to make sure that you always are aware of what type of exams you want to be able to provide that community. So sometimes depending on that functionality, you may not be able to support detailed exams or specialty exams, right? MR prostates, MR breasts. Some of that may not be included on those mobile selections. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what you want to do to support that community and what type of exams to make sure that when you're getting a mobile, that you're getting what you want for your organization. So this here is actually a picture of one of our PET CT mobiles. This is the most recent one that we just got about a year ago now. So when we talk about configuration of a trailer, you actually have the choice of picking 42 or 48 size trailers, 42 or 48 foot, I'm sorry, trailers. Depends on what your organization can support. If you do purchase a mobile, you have that choice. If you're leasing a mobile, you don't necessarily have that choice because they don't always have both options available. So the change in size, so if you go with a bigger, sometimes it allows you to have changing rooms on that mobile. So again, you need to take into account the setup of where you're taking that mobile to. Do you have changing rooms available? Do you really want patients changing inside the facility and walking outside to the mobile? It just depends on the setup, right? So that's just something to take into account. With the larger trailers, you have IV rooms. Sometimes you have the sub-waiting room area for those patients. And then ours are standard 48 across our organization. We stick with that size because of the mobile pads that we have, and we want to be consistent. The other important thing is if you are going to purchase a mobile, to decide whether or not you want that mobile wrap of marketing for your own organization on that unit. We also have had some suggestions to possibly get some donor money, and donors could have their name on that wrap on the unit. And then of course, the last thing is stock of trailers. Again, as I mentioned, depending on if you're leasing or buying, sometimes they have readily available 48-foot trailers to build in. Sometimes they don't, and you're waiting a little bit longer because they have to specifically order one. So some of the site requirements to take into account, again, when you're preparing for mobiles, you need to think about the space that you have. You need to think of the ease of accessibility for those patients, as I mentioned previously, of whether you want those changing rooms on the mobile or there's a close enough area inside the building. You want to kind of talk through that patient flow, the check-in process, and of course, emergency situations. And then what to include when you're preparing for mobiles. You want to, again, assess the space, awnings, concrete pads, electrical, networking, your IT support, city approval. There are some locations that the city does not approve a mobile to be on site, so that's very important to take into account. Sometimes cities don't allow the trailers to be parked in front of the building. They have to be in the back of the building. So it's just those type of situations that you really need to make sure that you're working with the city to know what's approved. And then I just put some approximate costs of what we've been dealing with at our organization. And again, we're from outside of Cleveland, so the cost may be different depending. So currently IT power is about $32,000. The awning, when you think about awning, you want that awning to be connected to the building to get you to the mobile, depending on that workflow and that patient flow. If it's too far away, how long that awning has to be. If it's right up against the building, you might need a small awning, so that price will vary for sure. Also, one of the things is we try to make it seamless for our patients. So a lot of our locations actually have heaters in that awning to make sure that the patients are not cold as they're walking from the building to outside to the mobile. Those are about $6,000 to $8,000 each. Reinforced concrete, about $20,000. And again, this doesn't include prep work or anything else that you have to do before you put it in a mobile pad. So for example, at one of our medical centers, we have to pull out some landscaping. They have to move some parking spots, stuff like that. So you're gonna have some additional costs, again, based on where you choose to make that mobile situated. Yeah?
Do a lot of those companies provide lodging options, or is that
Completely separate? It's a great question. So because it's a permanent structure at that medical center, we and the entity as an organization, you know, we as the organization and entity have to, they don't provide that awning, yeah. Because if we're gonna lease a unit, in all reality, when you're leasing a unit, you're probably gonna replace it with a permanent owned one eventually. So when we're leasing, we're doing business plans, trying to figure out whether we should be adding to our fleet permanently, where leasing should be that short-term option in the meantime. But as we all know, radiology equipment is very expensive. It's hard to get. So we've been leasing some equipment longer than we probably should be. And we actually are going to be moving forward to try to add additional purchased mobiles to our fleet because we've been leasing for well over a year at this point. So good question. Thanks.
And for our patient workflow at all the sites, I think we're having the patient go in to the radiology department like they do for any exam, right? That's our workflow at our site.
That's the preferred workflow. There are some locations based, like our wellness van, they can actually check in directly on the wellness van. They can report directly to that wellness van and they get checked in on the van before, they don't even have to go into the building. But most of the mobiles do go through the same patient flow and check-in process that any other patient does.
All right, site requirements and preparation when it comes to IT related. And IT means networking, computers, equipment on the truck that the organization has to provide, networking at the building, power at the building. So my team, again, works very closely with IT and started this, you know, we, at the one site, well, it was multiple sites, one unit. We learned quickly that we needed to make sure as we added to our fleet and as we added new locations that we had the same equipment on the outside of the building as far as networking power, because the type of cords that the team has to use on the truck to connect it. So we worked with IT, okay, what is our standard gonna be when we are putting these in across different locations as we're expanding? And so we've successfully done that now, making sure we also have the right equipment, the cables, you know, that are the same because they could have different connections. So really and then also HTM engagement, making sure they're aware of these type of things if they get called to have to do anything with the truck, the equipment on the truck. So making sure they're part of that discussion as needed, depending on who's servicing the unit. The other thing is important to consider is transferring. So we have like the wellness van that isn't always at a one of our sites, so we don't have network, readily available for them to plug into. So how do we get those images into our PAC system? How do they access our electronic systems? So essentially, how do they have network on that mobile unit? And right now, our wellness van is the only one that has this wireless capability. So we worked with Verizon and our IT team scoped it out and came back with a solution for us to use different cards, network cards that are wireless on our MAMO unit. So they can plug in, or if they're at an event that's not at our location, then they can still transfer images. We've not expanded that to other mobile devices. It might be something in the future that we could consider, because then that takes the equipment out of play that you need to have, on the building. And if we were ever to expand to mobile stroke cases, which we don't do today, but I know there are mobile stroke units out there. If we were to expand, we would definitely have to consider that, because the prioritization of images. Other thing to think about is preventative maintenance. We learned this pretty, I won't say quickly, but we learned it over time, and we're still learning. So we would get a call, a mobile device, they can't connect, they don't have power. They didn't have spare network cables. So we're making sure that the trucks have spare network cables on the truck. We're making sure that we're being proactive, because the network equipment, the power, it's outside. So it's exposed to the elements. There's some protection over it, but it's still exposed. And in Ohio anyways, we have all 4 seasons. So you have the rain, the wind, the snow. So we ask the technologist to take pictures and send to us so we can assess it without having to drive there, because they're spread out, and trying to be proactive. Also, again, working with our IT, we just had IT reach out to us about a location that we're no longer going to. So they said, hey, do you still need this equipment here? You're no longer going here. So thinking of those type of things when you're expanding or maybe no longer going to go to that location. So creating a plan, working together, and making sure that you're being as proactive as possible, making sure IT is aware that this is a priority, that this isn't a ticket that can wait 2-3 days because they have a lot of tickets, or your HTM partners, whoever, depending on what the situation is.
So,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Back.
That's okay. The one thing I want to mention is service on mobiles can be very complex. So from an HTM perspective, Biomed, I know Bev mentioned quite a few things that Biomed or HTM does help us with on site. But again, service can be very complex based on whether or not you own or you're leasing that piece of equipment. And not only is it based on whether you own or lease that piece of equipment, the actual equipment may be serviced by an OEM, but the actual trailer has to be serviced by a different vendor. So again, very complex. We have to be aware of who we're calling, making sure that our HTM partners are calling appropriate service for whatever the issue is on that specific truck. As I mentioned, the trailer is serviced by the transport company. And then also an important piece that has come about quite a bit over the last few months is based on where that piece of equipment is going to be serviced, we have to think about the PHI that's actually on that truck. So we'll talk through a couple different scenarios. So our MR units, our CT units, the majority of them are serviced on site at one of our hospital-based locations. The PHI stays on the truck because it's at a hospital base or organizational based location, I should say, because it's not just hospitals, it's ambulatory sites as well. But another concern is if for some reason that trailer has to leave a hospital property or ambulatory property to go to a garage to be fixed, depending on the issue, all that PHI has to be cleared before it leaves hospital space. So when you're transporting trailers from location to location, the PHI doesn't have to be removed. But if you ever take that off of that route and it goes to garage to be serviced. You have to make sure we work with our IT team very closely to get the PHI cleared in a timely manner before it goes and parks at a garage to get service.
And that's a result of our organization. I don't know, assuming other organizations have a similar policy where, you know, if we're even replacing a piece of equipment and it's going out the door, you have to clear all the PHI from the hard drives and everything, because you don't want that. And we've had mobile devices come to us from places as a temporary solution, and they had PHI left on them from other organizations. So just something people don't necessarily think about all the time. So that's been a lesson learned for us, not just for our mobiles, but even for our stationary if they're going to be leaving the site for replacement.
So we know how important it is from a compliance perspective, right?
Yeah.
Make sure that PHI is cleared before at least, no?
I used to be have a compliance
Okay.
officer, but we didn't have
Yeah.
Should it also be the mobile's company's responsibility to make sure it's also clear?
It should be, but I think as a hospital organization, like as an organization, because it's our patients, we also need to make sure, but you're correct. If for some reason they took it from another facility that didn't clear that PHI, then of course they do get, we do have some discussions about that, but. So now I just kind of want to touch base about the leadership structure for the mobiles. Historically, our mobiles were overseen by multiple different managers in the past. Not that it wasn't successful, it just isn't as successful as it is today because they have dedicated leadership now. So in the past, our mobiles like CT or MR would be overseen by a main manager from, like say the main academic medical center. And then the pet truck was overseen by the nuclear medicine manager. And then the mobile wellness was overseen by the supervisory manager for mobile. Where over the last 2.5 years, we've changed that structure. This summer will actually be 3 years that the structure has been changed. We actually have a dedicated mobile leadership team. So we have a manager and a dedicated mobile fleet supervisor, and the entire mobile fleet falls under that structure for leadership. So one of the important things is that leadership now has focused completely on mobile fleets, and the team engagement collaboration is absolutely different than it was in the past. The teams feel just as important as any of those staff members that are inside hospitals where they have a dedicated manager and supervisor. Lesson learned, they kind of felt like they were on an island in the past because they weren't dedicated mobile fleet teams. They pretty much floated from hospital to hospital onto the mobile every once in a while, where that's not the case now either. Another important thing is in our organization, we have a lot of matrix reported, like a matrix reporting structure. We have a lot of dotted lines, right? So the mobile manager, although she directly reports to me on the East Market, she works very closely with our West Market director, as well as Bev as IT director and our academic director. So again, a lot of dotted lines, big matrix, but our teams get it. They understand it. They understand how, because if it's obviously if that mobile's going to a different market, they have to engage with that manager at that location, stuff like that. So yeah. Good example, because honestly, the teams felt like they were on an island because they almost were forgotten about because they were on that mobile, right? So it seemed as if when they were on site, they weren't important to that entity manager, if that makes sense. So their main manager might have been like 20, 30 miles away, but then they almost didn't even seem important to that entity manager at the time, where now we encourage, as Michelle mentioned, for that rounding, for them to feel part of the team and engaged. We include them in celebrations. We include them in Rad Tech Week festivities where maybe historically they got forgotten about, right? So the next thing I just will talk on briefly is staffing. Of course, yes, we are hiring, right? You're always hiring. We're always hiring. I'm not sure how it is across the entire nation, but in our area, I believe it's the same. But we have quite a few vacancies in our radiology departments. So much so that it's very difficult to even have some of our equipment full schedules on a daily basis, right? Because of the staffing challenges that we're encountering today. So on the mobiles, we do have an internal mobile fleet team, as I mentioned. They're dedicated mobile team for all of our specific mobiles. They also encourage like site team collaboration, site team participation. So if for some reason, say one of our East Market medical centers needs to have a CT on site, we actually ask for support from inside that entity if needed, if we don't have enough staff on the mobiles. And the managers have been great with helping to staff mobiles as needed when it's on their particular site. Again, I talked about external. The external staffing is when you're leasing the equipment. They do provide some of that staffing as well. And then we do have those mobile stationary units at one of our ambulatory sites and medical centers. They are responsible for staffing the stationary mobile. It's weird, stationary equipment, but it's a stationary mobile because it's not left there in, you know, many months or many years. The site team does staff that as well. And then of course, reporting structure, as we mentioned, just that overall system partnership as a whole. So.
And Krissie, as an example, why we have a mobile stationary at like Ahuja, one of our sites, was because we didn't have physical space right inside, but we have needed the capacity. So as an example, that's why we have a stationary mobile.
Yeah.
The staffing from my team's perspective, as Krissie mentioned, we have a enterprise-wide EMR, Epic, and our PAC system and our voice dictation system. So we need to be nimble. And for example, we have 4 on our, we call them our technical team. So they deal with the networking, the connectivity, the power, but they also work very closely with the HTM and the IT teams again in their roles. But we assign a runner per week of those 4 teams, so they rotate to where if we get a call like, hey, we need to get the mobile in for service, something's broken, like we just found out about it, this is not planned, but we need someone to come clear the PHI. So that runner needs to get there, you know, same day, hopefully within a couple hours or less. And Krissie and I were just talking about that this morning, but just making sure that our teams know the expectations and that we have staffing, you know, assigned to do that. And if we had 2 go down, then we have 3, you know, 2 to 3 additional staff that can go address that. Also having a checklist. So an example, last week, we had a CT tube blowout at a site, one of our sites, and they needed the mobile CT to come there. And the mobile CT had not been there before. So we needed to quickly go through our checklist of creating that resource in our EMR, getting the template built, so getting the tech work list built, making sure, and this way it allowed them to do patients. And so we, you know, my team gets engaged and we have text messages going and quickly we have a checklist so we can get it done quickly. So that's another suggestion as far as you having the checklist to get these things, you know, because they're mobile. And that's one of the benefits of them, getting that access so those patients can get taken care of. Again, keeping that patient in mind, and so you don't have to cancel their appointments and you don't, or have them go somewhere else. So that's what we, for staffing, I have other informatics team members that, you know, address the build and things in Epic and the PAC system, the work list. So staffing is leveraged. It's all the same team, but we cover the mobiles and we know we need to be more nimble for them due to different challenges.
The next section, we're just going to talk about financials, the historic approach to financials versus how it's structured today for the financials. So in the past, the financials always went through our main campus location, and there was some IoT on the back end, and sometimes it was a huge mess. So we have worked with our other radiology leaders, directors. We've also worked with our finance team to get it all corrected for today and over the last year and a half. And we're still making some tweaks today as we speak for some items that we don't necessarily like how it's currently being done. So in the past, like I said, the IoTs included expenses at each of those locations, from salaries of the techs to supplies, linen, different transportation costs, leasing costs, and of course some of those repairs. So as of today, is the majority of them are corrected. We are actually letting the expenses follow the revenue for each of the separate entities. So when you're part of a huge organization like we are, each entity still has their own costing string and their own financials. So we're trying to make it for each of those entity leaders so they can see how much the mobile costs, what their revenue they get. So when you think of a big organization, you would think that one account would be good enough, but unfortunately that's not how it works in our organization. We've talked about possibly doing specific mobile fleet budgets and things like that, but it just doesn't work because that revenue ultimately goes back and hits wherever that mobile is parked at, if that makes sense. So Bev and I talked at another conference, and someone had suggested, why don't you guys just create that mobile fleet? And like I said, unfortunately, it's not as easy as you think it is when you're part of an organization as large as ours sometimes. So we just let it be considered as another modality at that specific entity, and we create costing string, stuff like that. So any questions so far? All right, so this next slide I put in here, we're going to talk about mobile MR pro forma, a purchase pro forma versus a leased pro forma. So I put in here just some assumptions, and then the next slide I'll show the actual pro forma and the difference. So the assumptions that we're going to assume today are we want an MRI 1.5 or 3T mobile. Expected usage is 8 to 10 patients a day. Contract duration 5 years. Financing rate for purchase would be 6%. 6%. I don't have my glasses. 6, thanks. I was like, I should probably look up there. And then if we ended up doing a lease term, 5 years through the operating lease. So it's too small on my paper here, so I'm gonna look up here. This is just a pretty much generic pro forma that I wanted to share just as an example for the side-by-side comparison. And you'll see that the initial cost, monthly payment, maintenance, insurance, depreciation, residual value, tax benefits, flexibility, and then of course the technology and risk. So you have your purchase numbers on the left, your lease numbers on the right. And then on the farther side of the slide, talks about the overall financial summary of a 5-year projection. And again, some of those considerations to take into account: purchase is ideal for organizations with capital reserves, long-term usage plans, preference for asset ownership, right? But again, it's all about knowing whether or not you need that short-term availability or that short-term solution versus a long-term solution.
All right, I'm going to talk about flexibility and expanding footprint in regards to access, and we're going to talk about patient satisfaction and community benefit. So access standardization. So when we build the mobiles in our system, we build them just like, you know, when Krissie was talking about part of that organization, part of that location. So like in the example of the CT, we build them in our system, so it's another CT resource. So when the patient's calling to schedule their appointment, they don't know that they're being scheduled on a mobile, except for when during the scheduling process, we've built in a question to make sure the patient can ambulate 3 steps. Doesn't mean go up 3 steps, but just ambulate on their own 3 steps. And if they say they can't, then we've leveraged technology within our system that will not allow them to be scheduled at that mobile resource because they're at our medical centers, our ambulatory sites. So it'll make sure they're scheduled on a stationary location, because that location would have the tools and space and items that are needed for that patient if they can't ambulate. So we've quickly done that, because we previously had patients that were being scheduled that couldn't ambulate, and then they wouldn't be able to have their exam. And of course, we don't want that to happen to the patient. So that's one of our lessons learned, and getting our patients scheduled at the right location for the right test. Exam durations. Our durations are standardized across all of our sites. Does not matter if they're on a mobile or a non-mobile. There is one exception due to the technology of our new PET CT, we do have reduced durations because it's a much newer unit and those scans can be done more quickly. So because of the technology, we have reduced durations for that device. But other than that, we do have standardized exam durations. Our templates, we work closely with Krissie's team. We have, they submit what their templates are for their different locations. We, again, my team knows they need to be very nimble because like last week, we had to quickly close a site, the mobile at one site because the mobile needed to go to another site. So having that infrastructure in place and team, that operations, is very important. And then the decision trees that we talked about with asking the question, that has been important too. The other thing that we've built in are questions like, if a patient has metal in the area that's being imaged, if that mobile device, mobile MR doesn't have the appropriate functionality to image those patients, but there's certain software, from my understanding, and even some of our stationary don't have it. So that makes sure the patient is scheduled in the right location, and that's not specific to just the mobiles, that's just any device. So decision trees are very important. The other thing, as I mentioned, was coverage of sites where equipment is down. The other example that we're getting ready to, and we've done this historically too, is if we have a site where equipment's being replaced. So if that MR unit's getting taken out, then we know we need to get a mobile there and, for however many months, weeks. And so that's been able to make us more nimble too and making sure our patients are taken care of. So it's another benefit of a mobile device.
2 months to 8 months, make those changes along the way. Yeah, or 10 months, yeah. 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 Just depends, so.
So the other thing we do around access is we monitor our backlog, meaning we have a goal to have within 3 days patient, this is for outpatients, that we have a third available appointment within 3 days. And we look at specific exam codes, one with contrast, one without contrast. We have our, this has also a mammo on there, but we look at all of our modalities, PET CT. So this shows us where we have a backlog, meaning, it's 26 days to get an MR appointment at location A, but it's 2 days to get an appointment at location B. Well, you probably need to flex your schedules and move that mobile around. So, or we've even used the mobile to add additional, availability. So one of our locations, their CT is very backlogged. So the mobile CT goes there now. And that's part of how we got a mobile CT, I believe, is we knew we had a CT backlog, and that was part of the business plan to get that mobile CT.
So short term, we are leasing a CT mobile, but our long term is one is currently being built for us, right? So we had to think at that moment what we had to do to get the access for our patients to be readily available. So both short term was to lease a CT unit, while the long term fix was to have one built, which is currently in the process.
And one thing I don't think we've mentioned is the trucks. So there's a trailer, right? And then you have to have truck service or service to move it, or is that?
So you have your semi truck that moves the trailer.
Right, so that's an additional cost, or?
Yeah, that is an additional cost. So that was part of the transport fees that I mentioned. Yeah. So how many miles they have to go to take the trailer from one place to the next location, so.
So any questions? We have
I say,
4
what else?
minutes left.
Great group.
Anything we did?
Yeah.
So with MR, the mobile MRs, what's the contingency for power loss? Is there a generator that travels with that?
Yes. So all of them have the generators on them. So sometimes, which is why it has to go to the garage, because the generator is only going to last so long, right? So yes. Yeah. So there was an issue with the chiller not too long ago. Again, they were trying to get the chiller working and ended up having to go to the garage overnight because they couldn't get the chiller to work on site. And that did not go back to an OEM, that went to the trucking company because it was part of the trailer, right? Complex service, so. We don't, they perform quality control. Yeah, knock on wood, don't jinx us. Yep. Yep. So every time the mobile goes onto a new site, there's obviously QC, QA that they have to do. And for some reason, if it fails, of course, another lesson learned would be our new mobile PET CT unit. We just had to put about $100,000 worth of service into it because one of the technologists forgot to lower the table before it left for transport, and it ruined a lot of the internal parts. Because the old PET CT, you didn't have to lower the table, and this new PET CT, you need to lower the table as low as it will go. So again, $100,000 worth of lesson learned, but we're now at, yeah, and we're now educating everyone through our online education courses, because I think across all the mobiles, it's important for them to know that they are doing all the proactive things they can do necessary before that truck. Yep. It is, you mean on the equipment on the truck? The mobile fleet, the mobile technologists perform that every time they arrive on site to the new location. And then if they run into issues, then they would call whatever's necessary, the OEM or to fix all of that. So before they would do their patients. Yeah.
From an accreditation standpoint, how do you accredit your mobile units? Do they get accredited through the hospital system under the umbrella of the Joint Commission, or how do you?
So we currently, we don't have Joint Commission any longer at our organization. We have DNV. So DNV accredits all of our locations, and it is CMC assets. So it's Academic Medical Center, our main hub assets. So the mobile fleet is part of that umbrella of DNV. But if a mobile is on site at an entity and they have a DNV inspection, they have every right to go on that truck and start asking for all of the necessary information. Now from an, Amy, thanks. From an ACR perspective, we actually are working with our physics team to actually get the accreditation for the mobiles as a whole, so that each entity does not have to do an additional ACR accreditation for the mobile that comes on site. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget, make sure you scan in.
Yep.
And then, of course, do the survey. We appreciate it. Good questions.